This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you want to pre-order Wilds of Eldraine, you can use my link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Hone, and it's time for another MTG Top 10. In this series, I normally rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. However, since we have the Wilds of Eldraine pre-release right around the corner, and I just completed my limited set review for it, this MTG Top 10 is going to be about limited, and in particular, I'm going to give you my picks for the 10 biggest bombs in this new format. So let's define bomb really quickly. In Magic, a bomb is a good thing. I did do a video in my Needs and Notes series where I went pretty deep on what exactly makes a card a bomb, so if you want to hear me talk about it for 20 minutes, you can check that out. The short version, though, is that a bomb is a card that is so powerful that it drastically alters the game state in your favor, even allowing you to come back from behind. In other words, they are the most powerful cards in the set for limited, and they are the cards that you most hope to get in your sealed pool or see as your pack one pick one in a draft. Without further ado, let's dive in with my picks for the 10 biggest bombs in Wilds of Eldraine. At number 10, I have Bitter Blossom. This one might be cheating a little bit because it's not actually part of the main set of Wilds of Eldraine, but you can get it in draft boosters. It's one of these Enchanting Tales cards, which means it's an enchantment reprint. For one generic and a black, it's an enchantment that says at the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life and create a 1/1 Black Fairy Rogue creature token with flying. If you play this on turn 2, it is entirely unbeatable, barring your opponent having enchantment removal, which is possible in this format, but the fact that this just makes an army for you without you even having to do anything other than invest 2 mana once, and sure, you're going to lose life. That is a downside. If you draw this and you're at like 2, it's not nearly as good. Plus, it does take a full turn to give you your first creature, but it just snowballs so much value for you so quickly that it's hard for this not to be one of the biggest bombs in the set, just like it was way back in Lorwyn. The fact that black has access to a bunch of life gain in the form of food tokens also minimizes this card's downside. Meanwhile, the fact that there's a fairy deck in blue-black maximizes the card's upside because you can get even more value out of the fact that you're getting all of these fairies. No matter when you play it, as long as you have like a couple of turns, it's going to start building you an advantage that is very hard for your opponent to beat. At number 9, I have Deceit Dragon. So the baseline of this card is that it's a 4-mana 4/4 with flying trample, and when it attacks, it makes a treasure token. So that's already a really good card. It doesn't quite reach bomb status for me because it doesn't do anything to make sure you get value. If your opponent kills it right away, in other words, you don't really get anything. But it makes up for that by also having an adventure side called Expensive Taste, which for 2 generic and a black is an instant, and you exile the top 2 cards of target opponent's library face down, and you can look at and play those cards as long as they remain exiled. This is a 3-mana draw 2 that then turns into a really scary dragon. One thing to keep in mind about the adventure side is that it does not let you do this as if you had mana of any color, unlike a lot of versions of this effect, but the fact that Deceit Dragon gives you treasure makes it more likely you can cast things even if they happen to be off color. And of course, the dragon can just win the game by attacking in the air, and ultimately can deliver a 3-for-1 with relative ease. At number 8, I have Gruff Triplets. The baseline here is that you pay 6 and get 3/3s with trample. That's already a pretty good card that can help you come back from behind, because you just add to the board way more than you usually can in limited for 6 mana when you make 3 bodies like this. But things don't end there, and that's what really pushes it into bomb territory. Each time one of these triplets dies, it puts +1/+1 counters equal to its power on your other creatures named Gruff Triplets. So when the first one dies, the other 2 turn into 6/6s. When the second one dies, the other one turns into a 12/12. Obviously, these are huge creatures that you can't ignore thanks to the fact that they have trample. This is another card that can deliver a 3-for-1 very easily, in addition to just being able to win the game for you with massive creatures. At number 7, I have Expel the Interlopers. This is a Wrath effect, where you choose a number between 0 and 10 and destroy all creatures with power greater than or equal to the chosen number. So, Wrath effects can often be awkward in limited because they just destroy everything, and that means it's not a card that's always useful for you. It's great if you're behind, but it's really not that good if you're at parity or ahead. One way of remedying that is by making it so a Wrath is sort of customizable, and this is one of those because you can choose a number that benefits you the most and hurts your opponent the most, and you still have this maximum upside where you can just say 0 and blow up the whole board, while also having access to an effect that will sometimes allow you to kill all of your opponent's stuff and you keep like 2 small creatures. It still won't always line up that way, but it still has this amazing upside when you're behind and can be really good even if you're at parity, or ahead even in some situations. At number 6, it's Mosswood Dread Knight. So I gave this one a bomb grade in my set review, but I only gave it an A-, which means barely a bomb, sort of lower tier bomb. Still amazing, but not as amazing as some other things. But the reason I gave it that grade is because I misread the creature side. So when Mosswood Dread Knight dies, you can cast it from your graveyard as an adventure until the end of your next turn. I missed that next. I thought you had to do it on the same turn, which already would be a really good card, because if you have the mana available, that would mean when it dies, you can cast Dread Whispers again and then recast it. So you get an opportunity to like completely untap and do this on the turn after it dies. So you can just keep sending it at your opponent, you can keep blocking with it, you can sacrifice it to things, and you can just keep on casting Dread Whispers from your graveyard and then casting Mosswood Dread Knight. There is exile removal in the set, including at lower rarities, that does put a stop to the nonsense here, but the baseline of this card is still that you get a 2-for-1 between the adventure side and the creature side, but then it turns into an endless value engine that your opponent can only stop with a few different cards in the set, and that makes it really strong. It's not going to overpower your opponents by being like a big scary creature all on its own, obviously, but the number of cards you end up drawing from this, the amount of value you get, is insurmountable. Number 5, we've got the Goose Mother, which also happens to be one of my favorite cards in the set. For X, a green, and a blue, you get a 2/2 with flying that enters with X +1/+1 counters, and when it enters the battlefield, it creates half X food tokens rounded up, and when it attacks, you may sacrifice a food if you do draw a card. So, it's kind of like Hydroid Crassus, if you ever played with that card. It's not quite as good because Hydroid Crassus had a cast trigger that drew you cards and gained you life. The Goose Mother makes you go through an extra step here where she makes food tokens, which you have to pay mana for to gain life, and you can only draw cards using those food tokens and only when the Goose Mother attacks. But what you get is a more efficient creature than Hydroid Crassus. No matter where you cast this, it's generally going to feel pretty good. Even if you only pay 1 for X, you get a 3-mana 3/3 with flying that made a food token and can draw you a card when it attacks. And obviously it scales all game long. Eventually you can have a mountain of food tokens and you can draw a ton of cards. And the fail case is generally that you're going to have a bunch of food tokens left over, which are useful in the format. So it makes sure you get some value out of food tokens. And then if it's left unchecked, it hits really hard in the air and draws you a bunch of cards, which, you know, that means your opponent's never going to beat it. And number 4, I have Virtue of Persistence. So the adventure side on this card is an amazing removal spell that always makes the cut in limited. An amazing removal spell itself is not a bomb, but that's kind of the baseline we have here, an amazing removal spell. Then, in the later part of the game, you can cast it as the actual Virtue, which turns into a win condition. Now, it does take a while to get going. You have to wait until your next upkeep. There have to be cards in graveyards for you to reanimate, but that's pretty likely by that stage of the game, especially because it checks both graveyards. And the fact that it's a little slow is made up for by the fact that it was a removal spell you cast earlier in the game, and one that actually gained you life, which buys you a little bit of time for an effect that's slow like this. Obviously, the Virtue all on its own isn't a bomb. In fact, it would be sort of a clunky medium card that, yeah, could win you the game in the late game, but is bad the rest of the game. And obviously, the removal side isn't a bomb. But you have a card here that's amazing in the early game and amazing in the late game as a result of the adventure side and the enchantment side. And that's what makes it a bomb. At number 3, I have Realm Scorcher Kite, which is a 6-mana 4/6 with flying and haste, and you can pay 1 generic and a red to do 1 damage to any target. That card would already be pretty close to bomb status. Haste means it can do something the turn you play it, and then if you're allowed to untap and you can spend this mana to do 1 damage to a bunch of stuff, you're going to be in great shape. But things don't end there. It comes with bargain. If you have a food token or something to throw away when you cast this, it makes 4 mana in any combination of colors when it enters. You can use this to potentially double spell, but the floor is that you use that to ping a thing twice or ping 2 things with the ability. So it's generally going to add and subtract substantially from the board most of the time when it comes down, giving you a great fail case. And obviously, if it's left unchecked, if you're allowed to untap with this huge creature in play, with a powerful activated ability, there's basically no way your opponent wins. At number 2, I have Virtue of Loyalty. It's a lot like the other Virtue that made the list in that in the early game, you get a decent card. The early game card isn't as good as the Black Virtues adventure side. I mean, a 2-mana 2/2 Knight with Vigilance and Flash, basically. That's fine, but it's not as exciting as that removal spell. However, it has a much cheaper other side, and it's one that gets going the turn you play it. And that, for me, is what makes it go higher up on this list. It does need you to have some board state, but that's not asking a whole lot, especially because this very same card will have given you a 2/2 earlier in the game. And, you know, in Limited, you're going to have a bunch of creatures. Most of the time, you're going to have 2 or 3 things in play, at least when you play this. And it's rapidly going to snowball, buffing your entire board. Untapping your creatures, too, really matters because it means your opponent is much less likely to be able to attack you effectively. And so it puts you in a situation where you just can't lose a race. Before we look at my pick for the biggest bomb in the set, here are some honorable mentions. All of these cards received a bomb grade in my set review, but didn't quite make the list. And at number 1, I've got Ashok, Wicked Manipulator. They only put 1 Planeswalker in this set this time around, but they made sure it was a good one. So Ashok comes with a +1 that basically lets you draw cards. That's always a really powerful thing to have on a Planeswalker. And Ashok also comes with a -2 that makes 2 1/1 Black Nightmare creature tokens that can grow every time you go to combat and you've already exiled a card that turn. So Planeswalkers who can protect themselves, which Ashok can with 2 bodies, also tend to be a really powerful thing. And it's going to be really easy to grow these tokens. Obviously, Ashok can do it on their own with the +1, which will always exile 1 card, but Casting Adventures does it. Casting an effect that exiles an opposing permanent or whatever does it. There's lots of different ways to do it. They are built into Ashok, but even if Ashok goes down, you may have more ways in your deck. You're very likely, in fact, to have more ways in your deck to grow those Nightmare tokens. If you do ever get to the -7, things can get kind of silly if you've exiled a bunch of stuff with the +1 and you have a couple of adventures exiled and then you use the -7. But mostly Ashok is about the +1 and the -2. You get card advantage, you get to add to the board, and it's something you add to the board that becomes a very real threat rather quickly. Ashok also has this static ability that mostly doesn't matter. There's not going to be that many times, first of all, when you're paying life, and second of all, when it's going to be better for you to exile some of your library than pay that life. But it is an extra ability on top of a card that is already incredibly powerful. So those are my picks for the 10 biggest bombs for Wilds of Eldraine Limited. If you want to own any of these cards, because most of them are going to be good in other formats too, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you want to see my set review for this new format, you should see the playlist on your screen shortly. And if you want to go the extra mile in supporting me and the channel, you can do that by becoming a channel member or a patron. You can find ways to do those things in the description. Thanks for watching.